Once upon a time, I was invited to a costume party hosted by none other than Scott Phillips, the coolest kid in my fifth grade class. I know. Now, I don't know about you, but I remember fifth grade as the year that I first began to take notice of the social hierarchy of things. The year I first began to notice that there was a sort of pyramid of coolness with some kids at the top and more of us, myself included, closer to the bottom. And I was fascinated by trying to figure out exactly how the rules of this game worked. Was I near the bottom because I still wore sweatpants to school every day when all the other kids moved on to jeans? Or was it because word had somehow gotten out that I wanted to grow up to be a singer like Mariah Carey? A dream I still cling to. As far as I could tell at the time, the most revered kids were the ones who were the very best, the most skillful and talented at making fun of other kids, which made the whole system, theologically speaking, hell. Now, looking back, the pyramid seems to have been mostly correlated with gender roles and who is the best at performing their part, boy or girl. Girls with fashionable outfits were higher up on the pyramid, of course, as were boys who were good at boy things, like playing sports or hiding your feelings. Right? So back to this high-stakes costume party. I had spent weeks deciding whether to go as a clown or an army guy. I had both outfits in my house, and I just went back and forth, deciding and redeciding, until I eventually changed my mind at the last possible moment. I think we had actually gotten in the car when I raced back inside and threw off the clown costume I'd had on, and I grabbed the army outfit and got dressed in the car on the way to the party. So you can only imagine my surprise when I arrived at the party, and I learned that this was not, in fact, a costume party. Oh, dang. But it was an army-themed party. Right? So at the end of the night, I won the award for Best Dressed, which is the only time in my life anyone has even considered giving me an award like that. Now, you would think that this miracle of good fortune would have left me feeling on top of the world, but I was actually just as freaked out as ever, knowing that I escaped such massive embarrassment by the skin of my teeth. I knew that the rules of this game were still not in my favor, even if I'd been momentarily dealt a good hand for the night. And just the thought, the image of showing up to that army party in a clown costume is an image that, even though it never happened, is still burned into my mind all these years later. So much so that I'm preaching to you about it this morning. Now, fast forward a couple of years, and I attended a summer camp where these rules seemed to be turned upside down. There were certainly still folks at this UU summer camp that were more popular than others. That's always the case in some way, but they seemed to be the ones who were the warmest and the most welcoming. In this new place, respect went to the people that invited newcomers to join the circle, into the conversation. The ones that fostered connection instead of competition. More love, less hate. I remember wondering, even at the time, how does a place like this even happen? One conversation in particular that maybe explains a piece of it has stuck with me all these years. I was on a long walk with a new friend of mine. I don't remember exactly what I said to him, but I basically bragged to him that somebody who we were both close with had given me a friendship bracelet instead of him. And we all know that in the social currency of hippie love camp, friendships are like the gold standard. So here I was, enjoying this person's company, really enjoying my time with him, and then saying this awful thing to him about who's closer friends with who. But my new friend responded to my unkindness with love. And he did it in a way that I didn't even know was possible. He looked me in the eye and he smiled, and he said how glad he was that I was finding a home here. More connection, less competition, genuine love, creative love. Whatever nonsense I had learned about social hierarchy and whatever awful lessons I had internalized about how men are supposed to speak to each other, I saw, for at least that moment, I saw for the ridiculousness that they were. I didn't feel shamed by him, but I did feel silly for having been stuck in this old way of thinking, believing that competition and put-downs would get me somewhere. He had literally loved the hell out of me. Friends, if we hope to build a more loving and just world, we need mentors like this. People that can teach us the skills of a loving community. Teach us how to use creative love to dismantle the status quo. If we have any hope for building the kind of world we want to live in, we need to seek out those mentors who love us enough to meet us where we're at and love us enough not to let us stay there. And then we need to go out and be that person for somebody else, because nobody but nobody can make it here alone. Years ago in college, I was at a training for political activists. At the beginning of the training, we were asked to introduce ourselves by sharing our name, where we were from, and the gender pronouns that we used, whether we wanted to be called by he or she or they or something else. This was the first time I had ever heard this offer. All my life, people had read my gender in somewhat complicated ways, but this was the first time I'd ever been explicitly offered the option of identifying my gender as felt right to me. No one had ever asked before. Going on to learn the stories of transgender people in my life and in my reading, my heart opened. And even though I continued to identify as male, I began to recognize how the multitude of behaviors and thoughts and feelings and preferences that make me who I was had been carved up and placed in these narrow boxes of gender. This invitation, this first invitation to share my pronoun, was a gift. You don't have to call yourself by what the rest of the world has always called you. You are invited to show up here as yourself. No costumes required. The narrow boxes of gender limit us in different ways. Too often, these made-up rules define not only the clothes we wear, how we speak to each other, who takes up space in the dining table or the boardroom table, who gets paid for what kind of work. There are few among us for whom the made-up story of gender has not limited our understanding of who we are or who we might be. A little while back, I heard a story about basketball star Wilt Chamberlain, who, despite being one of the greatest basketball players of all time, was terrible at free throws. He normally made an atrocious 40% of free throws. It was a weakness for him, and it was a huge weakness for his team. There was one game, though, in 1962, where he made 90% of his free throws. And the difference in this one game, he was throwing from between his legs. In junior high, I learned this was called granny style, perhaps inappropriately, but it turns out that it is a much better way to shoot free throws. But at the very end of the game, despite having immediately solved his greatest weakness as a player, Chamberlain went back to throwing overhand, and he decided to go back to missing. And the only explanation he ever gave for switching back was that throwing underhand made him feel like a sissy. To the greatest player of all time, the only thing more important than basketball, more important than his career, more important even than being a good teammate, was not looking like a sissy. I wish that Chamberlain had had a camp friend like mine, or maybe a loving, progressive faith community like yours, who could have helped him find himself. I don't know if we could say that a community like this could have loved the hell out of him, but at least we could have loved the bad free throwing out of him. Religion ought to be a place where we dismantle the boxes that have been placed over us and locked down around us, a place where we confront oppression wherever we find it, so that the inherent worth and dignity of all can shine a little brighter. Religious community should be a place where love comes in rainbow colors. Dear ones, there are many of us who were raised as boys and we were educated into this masculinity. We who call ourselves men have sometimes chosen misguided understandings of status over our relationships. We've picked images of ourselves over, well, shooting good free throws. But too often, in too many ways, we've been taught to choose image over authenticity. We were taught to value speaking more than listening, or objectification instead of real connection. Dear ones, if this describes some piece of your own story, fellow men, as it certainly does mine, would you recommit with me to building the skills for beloved community that sets our relationships, which are certainly holy, sets our relationships ahead of the false idols of status and power? If so, would you say, I do, fellow men? Thank you. And so similarly, for those of us educated into the myth of whiteness, we have too often been taught to value our own comfort above justice. We were taught to value individualism above community, and intellectualized empathy instead of gut-level transformation, when transformation is what this country so badly needs right now. So in this moment of reflection, friends, this moment of reviving the spirit, will those of you who identify as white join me in recommitting to re-education and to loving justice, not just as an idea, but as a way of life? If so, would you say, I do? I do. Beloveds, nobody but nobody can make it out here alone. Religion ought to be the place where we dismantle the boxes of binaries that have been locked down around us, where love comes in rainbow colors. In Canada a few years ago, a particularly awful video went viral online. A video of a white conservative religious woman rapping about how transgender people shouldn't be able to use the bathrooms for which they identify. That's right, I said rapping. This video was awful on multiple levels. An 11-year-old Unitarian Universalist friend of mine, Anthony, was confused. He was confused that someone would think religion would ever be used for discrimination, because he had grown up Unitarian Universalist, and as someone who at the time identified as gender creative, his UU community, his religious community, was the first place where he was ever totally accepted without reservation. And so he got to work, and he organized first his mom, and then dozens of other Unitarian Universalist congregations from across Canada who worked together to create a new video, a video sending messages of love and support to the trans community and proclaiming the role of religion in celebrating our full humanity, regardless of gender expression. Now, when Anthony's mother expressed perhaps legitimate concern about her 11-year-old child, a gender creative person, posting a video online on this controversial issue, she said, "Some people out there might hold this against you." And 11-year-old Anthony, he responded, "That's right, Mom. That's not a reason to be quiet. That is a reason to speak up." In our world today, not only are individual prejudice and hate, of course, still with us, but there are systems of expanding inequality and violence and isolation that continue to divide us by gender, by race, by class, by able-bodied and not. Bigotry in our world isn't just about hate speech and religious tests for refugees or the mass incarceration of people of color. It's in the school-to-prison pipeline, it's in gender policing, it's in our systems of healthcare and housing. I know that I have a role in those systems, whether I like it or not, and I still have so much to learn about how my own identity interacts and intersects with the world around me. So I'm looking for communities. I'm looking for mentors like Anthony that can teach me the skills I need to find creative love that dismantles those systems. As a white guy with a middle-class background, I sometimes feel like I happen to wear just the right costume to this party. It means by that some accident of fate, things around me can seem more equitable than they are. It means that my community can appear safer than it is. I need people like Anthony, people like my camp friend to mentor me and model for me the tools of genuine love and creative love. Because I'm still learning what it looks like to find those moments where we can change the rules of the game together. So I invite you, dear ones, to join me in seeking out those mentors that can show us the better way that we didn't know was possible. When we find ourselves divided into false binaries, let's respond by honoring the full spectrum of humanity with genuine love. Where there is oppression, let us find the tools to celebrate diversity and dismantle the barriers to equality with creative love. And where many among us are marginalized, let's redistribute power of resources and wealth and relationships with love that alters the status quo. And in our prayers and our words and in our faithful action, let us build the beloved community we know is possible. You are beautiful.